So what are narcissists even looking for when they're in a relationship? Are they even looking for connection at all?
Not in the way that you and I would think about it.
Okay.
They might have like trophy spouse that they're showing off, or brag about having high status friends, or even just look for these short-term flings.
Oh, wow.
All just to validate themselves, just to feel worthy.
That's pretty sad when you think about it.
It is sad. And on top of that, this desire for self-enhancement also is tied to this desire for power and control within the relationship. So that's where we see gaslighting, we see these mind games come in. And it's all about destabilizing the partner so they can stay in control.
But then how come people are initially attracted to them?
Yeah, that's the paradox, isn't it? So the lecture gets into the psychology of attraction, and it turns out narcissists can be masters of creating that initial spark.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it's more than just people having bad judgment.
Much more. For one, narcissists will often really prioritize physical appearance. They will put a lot of time and effort into looking attractive.
So it's like they're always on presenting the best version of themselves.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that confidence and energy can be really alluring, especially nowadays when we're always seeing these messages of success and confidence being equated.
Totally.
Think about all those picture-perfect dating profiles that you see online. All that image stuff really feeds into that.
It does. It's easy to fall for that.
And this actually ties into a model that the lecture called the chocolate cake model. So think about it like indulging in that delicious chocolate cake. At first, it's super satisfying, but later on, it can make you feel sick. Emotional intimacy, on the other hand, which should be growing over time, stays low the whole time.
Wow.
It's like a sugar rush followed by a crash.
It is. You get hooked on that initial excitement, but then there's just nothing there.
You're left feeling empty.
Yeah.
And the lecture takes this even a step further and talks about the extended agency model and how narcissists, they act like these firewood collectors, constantly seeking external validation, always having to fuel their self-esteem.
Oh, I see. They're like burning through relationships.
They are, and that's why they can never really create that genuine connection.
Wow. So it sounds like this lecture is saying proceed with caution.
Absolutely. Recognize those red flags.
Yeah.
Early on, it can save you a lot of heartache later.
Okay, so what are some of the red flags then? What should people watch out for?
One of the biggest things is a lack of empathy. Pay attention to how they talk about their past relationships, how they talk about themselves. Do they ever take responsibility? Do they minimize others' feelings?
It's like looking beyond that charm and seeing how they actually treat other people.
Exactly. And another thing is this constant need for validation.
Oh, okay.
Are they always fishing for compliments, bragging about their achievements, surrounding themselves with people who are of high status?
It's like they need that external reassurance all the time.
Yes, and all of that can lead to some bad behaviors like infidelity, mate poaching,
Wow.
even in extreme cases, lying and manipulation.
That's scary.
It is scary, and it's even more amplified in today's online dating world.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, because dating apps, they create this environment where people are judged on looks and this curated persona. It plays right into that desire for self-promotion and validation.
It's like a digital playground for narcissists.
And that can lead to behaviors like breadcrumbing or ghosting,
Oh,
all of which can emotionally destabilize people.
that makes sense. People are already vulnerable in that online dating world.
And that's why it's important to be aware of these dynamics.
Yeah.
You have to trust your gut.
So you're saying it's about being cautious, not just online, but in all relationships.
Exactly, recognizing these patterns.
And then if someone's in a relationship with a narcissist, what can they do?
So the lecture gets into some guidance there.
Yeah.
And one of the big things is establishing firm boundaries,
Okay.
being able to say no, not letting yourself be manipulated.
But that sounds easier said than done.
It is tough, especially if someone's really skilled at pushing your buttons. And the lecture actually talks about a specific situation of a woman trapped in this long-term marriage with a narcissist, where kids are involved and they share finances and assets.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. A lot of people find themselves in that situation, unfortunately. And the advice really is to prioritize protection, seek legal counsel, build a strong support network with friends and family, set boundaries, and if kids are involved, make sure their well-being is first.
Yeah, of course.
Especially if there's a risk of abuse.
Exactly.
That's when involving law enforcement might be necessary.
Okay, so if safety is the first priority, is there anything you can do to actually try and improve things in the relationship?
Yeah, it's complicated. One thing it mentions is establishing a reward system, praising the narcissist for actions that benefit the relationship. For example, If your partner never helps with chores, you can acknowledge and praise them when they actually do something, like taking out the trash.
So is it like positive reinforcement?
It can feel like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about trying to create a healthier dynamic. And it can be collaborative.
But it sounds like this takes a lot of patience.
It does, a deep understanding of them too, and it might not always work.
You can't control other people.
Exactly. And sometimes the healthiest thing to do is just to distance yourself.
Even leave the situation.
Yes, and that decision shouldn't be taken lightly. There's always challenges with that. And the lecture also said that narcissists often target specific types of people.
Oh, interesting. So who do they target?
People who are empathetic,
Okay.
caring,
Yeah.
willing to give them the benefit of the doubt.
So then it's about being self-aware, too.
Exactly. Knowing your own vulnerabilities and why you might be attracted to these types of people.
It's like, why do we keep reaching for that chocolate cake, even if we know it's going to make us sick?
That's the question, isn't it? And the lecture talked about how men and women can be different, too.
Oh, okay. How?
For example, men tend to get status from having more sexual partners, which isn't as much of a thing for women. So that can change how male and female narcissists approach things like short-term relationships.
That makes sense. It's all about that trophy spouse idea, but then it's not just in romantic relationships, right?
No, it's everywhere. Friendships, work, even with their own children. They might brag about their kids' achievements or only surround themselves with high-status friends.
To make themselves look better.
Exactly.
It's all about that external validation.
It is, and in today's society, it's even more prevalent because we put such a high value on image and self-promotion.
That's true.
The expert in the lecture asked, is our culture actually contributing to more narcissism?
Wow, that's a big question.
It is, and it leads us to an even bigger question. How can we cultivate genuine connection in a world that seems so superficial? The lecture talks about how to get deeper connections. We have to understand what drives narcissism in the first place.
Get into the psychology of it.
Exactly. And the lecture says it often stems from a deep insecurity and a lack of self-worth.
Really? It's surprising.
It is, right.
Yeah.
You think they'd be super confident, but it's like all a show, you know?
Oh, so they're overcompensating.
Yeah, they build up this persona of being superior and self-important just to protect themselves from feeling like they're not good enough.
I see. So they're super sensitive to anything that challenges that.
Exactly. The lecture even calls it an ego threat. Any situation that makes them feel less than perfect.
Like rejection.
Yeah, or frustration. Being told no.
And how do they react to that?
It can be different for everyone. Controlling behavior, even violence in some extreme cases.
It's a spectrum.
Yeah, not everyone who has these traits is dangerous,
Of course.
but it's important to be aware of it.
Yeah, it's not just personality quirks. It can have real consequences.
Exactly. And that's why understanding the psychology is so important. So we can recognize the patterns, both in others and ourselves.
So how does this ego threat thing play out in actual relationships?
Imagine you're dating someone, and they always have to be the center of attention. Every conversation is about them. They need constant praise.
Exhausting.
It is. And the lecture talks about how they often have trouble with empathy.
What does that mean?
It means they have a really hard time understanding how others feel.
Because they're so focused on themselves.
And that makes it almost impossible to have a real two-way relationship.
It's all one-sided.
Yeah, they need constant validation, but don't give much back.
Like a bottomless pit.
Exactly. You can never give enough.
And that's what ruins their relationships.
Yeah, they burn through people, leave a trail of hurt.
So they're looking for validation, but push everyone away in the process.
It's really sad.
It is, but I guess understanding why helps.
It does, for protecting ourselves and maybe even helping them.
Yeah, I hope so.
Awareness is the first step to change.
And we all have an ego, right? We can all be self-centered sometimes.
The lecture actually mentioned this thing called the better than average effect.
What's that?
It's basically that most people overestimate how good they are.
So we all have a little narcissism.
Maybe. It's human nature to want to feel good about ourselves, but there's a difference between that and actual narcissism.
Okay, so how do you tell the difference?
I think it's about empathy. Can you see things from other people's perspective? A healthy ego lets you be confident without putting others down. Valuing yourself, but recognizing others' worth, too.
And that's where narcissists struggle.
Yeah, the lecture said narcissists often feel they're better than their partners in lots of ways. It creates a lot of tension in the relationship.
It does. It undermines the whole partnership.
They're too focused on winning to see what really matters.
How do we create spaces where people value realness, vulnerability?
I think it starts with just small, intentional acts.
Okay, like what?
choosing to be present, putting our phones
We're
away.
actually listening to each other.
Exactly. Those things show that you care, that you respect the person.
Yeah, and that you're really trying to connect
And it's also about the language we use, choosing words that build people up.
rather than tear them down. Words that create understanding.
Yeah, and remembering that strength comes from being vulnerable.
It takes courage, though.
It does. To be vulnerable and to let other people be vulnerable.
It's about making it safe for everyone.
A space where it's okay to not be perfect, to just be human.
And I think that starts with being kind to yourself.
Self-compassion.
Yeah, treating yourself like you would treat a good friend. You can't pour from an empty cup.
Fill your own cup first.
With self-care, acceptance, knowing when to say no.
Protecting your energy, your well-being.
And I think surrounding yourself with good people is important too.
Yes, people who support you, who inspire you.
So even though it feels like the world is full of narcissism, we can make a choice.
Choosing to be present. Choosing connection.